Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Hi, Mark. Hi,
Morning,
Richard.
morning, Diane. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Hi, Harley. Shabbat Shalom. Good to see you.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good to be seen. Wait,
That's
wait,
so
where did I
funny.
hear that before?
It's in the Parsha today.
Yeah, oh yes.
Are you were kidding me?
No, yes, I was
Oh.
listening last night.
Oh, I wasn't there. I didn't hear it. So, um, David talks about Hagar being seen by God.
Abraham,
Oh, Abraham. Hagar
yeah,
was seen.
the land I will show you and you'll be seen. And I'm
I
trying to figure out the grammar of that, but I
I
figured he knows better than me, so.
got it. Got it. Hi, Paul. Hi, Tsomi. Shabbat Shalom. I talk to moving boxes. The boxes are moving. I don't say anything. Hi, Daniel. Hi, Asher Chaim. Good to see you. Hi, Daniel. Shabbat Shalom. All right, we're going to start in 1 minute.
Was that a question about the grammar of "you will be seen"?
Elizabeth?
Yeah, Harley was asking that.
Yeah, I think our eka, instead of "I shall show it to you," our eka, "I shall show you," you will be seen.
Oh, I shall show you to everybody else, you're saying.
Yeah, that was my guess at it.
And that's why it's good to show up early.
Talking about showing.
I wasn't early
Right,
enough, I guess. I was still putting on my tie.
right.
All right, it's 9 o'clock, everybody. Ready to roll? Yeah, great. Nechemiah, Boker Tov, Shabbat Shalom. Mark, do you feel like sharing the bracha with us today? We're about to screen share it.
Sure.
Okay. Aliza, I think we're ready for the blessing over Torah study.
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam asher kibshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivonu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen. Amen. A moment of gratitude for these sacred ancient words that really, I think, illuminate our lives, or that's how I experience it, at least. Okay, so today we have a momentous parsha called Lech Lecha. It's about God calling Abraham to go forth, right? To go forth from everything Abraham knows. And at this point, he's not Abraham, he's Avram. So, what I want to look at, and I often do this with you, is a little bit about where did the last parsha leave off? And what does that tell us about Avram? And I think it tells us maybe something about why he was chosen. I'm not sure. But at least it tells us more about where he's coming from and what it cost to leave. So those are some of my questions for today. And I'm going to share some text with you and some of my thoughts with you, and then we'll open things up. Okay, ready to roll? Good morning, Alina. Good morning, Alana, Margot, Iva, Alan, Becca. Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Okay, Beth. I don't know if I got Beth there. Okay, here we go. Iva. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, and people feel free. I wanted to say one more thing, which is feel free to chat away in the chat, but don't do that at the cost of listening to one another. Okay, so it's I think it's a balance that we're trying to achieve here. I see a lot of knowing nods, so I guess I hit a vein there. Okay, sharing my screen. Here we go. Okay. So we're going to look at all kinds of things today. There's a lot of material. I'm sure I have too much, so we're not going to do all of it. And I'm going to open up with a few quotes. And some of this material I've learned with other people, but every time we look at this, it sort of, plays out differently, a different revelation for the moment. So I'm starting with a quote from Ismar Shorsh, who was 2 chancellors ago of the Jewish Theological Seminary. Was actually the chancellor when I went to rabbinical school. And I whatever. This is like one of the quotes I live by, or it's an idea I live by. I don't know if I live by this particular quote, but it's an iteration of this idea. In Judaism, precisely because the Torah is revered as divine, it becomes sorry, I have to slow down. It becomes susceptible to unending interpretation. It would be a denigration of God's word to saddle it with just a single meaning. So those of you who like to read literature and poetry, how much more is this true? Which, the best poetry and literature has like plays on all kinds of like levels, right? And we interpret on all kinds of levels. And how much more true would this be of the Torah if it were divine? Or I'm trying to be careful about my language. If we approach it as divine, then it has endless meanings. And doesn't mean that it can mean anything, but it has endless meanings. Okay, I'm tripping over my words because it's complicated. Right? What does it mean that the Torah is divine? It can mean all kinds of things. So those of you who know me and have learned with me know that I don't believe that there was a literal revelation, but I believe deeply in revelation, and that the Torah is God's gift to us. If those two different ideas can stand. Okay. And then I quote my chavruta Sharon Cohen-Anisfeld, who's the president of Hebrew College. I don't know if she's with us now. And this was her installation speech. I forget what year, Sharon. If you're there, you can tell us. 2 years ago? With God's opening words to Abraham, the Torah reminds us that the journey forward and the journey inward are simultaneous and inseparable. This is the deep grammar of Lech Lecha. So something to think about. What does Lech Lecha mean? So go and go for yourself, right? Go for yourself. So we're going, it's an inward journey, it's an outward journey. And, holding those two ideas, I think will take us a long way to understanding what this means and what God's call is. Okay, so now here's the backdrop, and the backdrop is so complicated. So this is a genealogy at the end of Genesis 11. And before I read genealogies carefully, my eyes would glaze over and I'd kind of skip over them and not think that they had anything to tell us. But it turns out, if you look carefully at a genealogy, wow, there's so much there. And you'll see, hopefully, in a minute that this is true. So here's the backdrop. We start with Avram's grandfather. When Nahor had lived 29 years, he begot Terach. So Terach is the father of Avram. And already before we get into this, I want to alert you to that these names have 2 letters. The names in this genealogy have 2 letters that recur, and they are Chet and Resh, right? So you see Nahor, you see Terach. We will see Haran, which has a hey, but sounds very much like the place name Haran. So Chet Resh. And it's interesting because Terach, by the tradition, although not explicitly here in Genesis, although in Joshua we see that Terach is called an idol worshiper. Terach, this whole passage is resonant with the word Yareach, which is moon. And the place where Avram's born, and then the place that they get to, which is Haran, are both seen as centers of moon worship in ancient Mesopotamia. So just interesting hints and resonances. Okay, so I wanted to give you that background, and now we go to Vayechi Nachor Acharei Holido et Terach Tisha Esrei Shana Uma'at Shana Vayoled Banim Uvanot. Okay, so after the birth of Terach, Nachor lived 119 years. So he was a pretty old man when he died, and begot sons and daughters. Okay, so now we move into the line more directly of Avram. 26. Vayechi Terach 70 shana, vayoled et Avram. et Nachor ve'et Haran. So again, we're told that when Terach had lived, not again. When Terach had lived 70 years, he's a 70-year-old man, right? So very different than his father, Nachor. So he's an old man or an older man when he has children. And we don't know anything about Mrs. Terach, nothing about Avram's mother. He begot Avram, Nachor, and Haran. So if this order is correct, then Avram is the oldest. Okay, so now we go backwards and we sort of, name this genealogy. Now this is the line of Terach. Ve'ela toldot Terach. Terach holidet Avram, et Nachor, et Haran, Haran holidet Lot. So there's some going backwards to go forwards. This is the line of Terach. Terach begot Avram, Nachor, and Haran begot Lot. So we have the beginning of a new generation. But what happens? Vayamat Haran al Penei Terach Aviv be'eretz moladato be'ur kastin. There's the death of a child. There's a tragic death of a child. Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terach. But if we look at the Hebrew and translate it literally, is before the face of Terach. He died before his father in his native land or of the Chaldeans. And then life goes on. Vayikach Avram Nachor lahem nashim shem eshet Avram Sarai v'shem eshet Nachor Milka bat Haran avi Milka v'avi Yizka. So Avram and Nachor took to themselves wives, the name of Avram's wife being Sarai, and that of Nachor's wife Milka, the daughter of Haran, the daughter of Milka and Iscah. The father of Milka and Iscah. So Nachor, Avram's brother, marries his niece, the daughter of Haran, his dead brother's daughter. Okay, and Haran is the father of Milka and Iscah, and we never hear of Iscah again, right? So Milka, as far as I know, Milka marries Nachor, and Iscah, the rabbis say that she's actually identical to Sarah, but we don't know that. And, this is very ripe, this sort of dangling female here who's not married, for Midrash, especially because Yizka means vision. Right? So maybe she's a single prophetess who dedicated her life to prophecy. Who knows? I'm just spinning right now. Okay, so now, Vatahi Sarai Akara Ein La Vlad. Sarai was barren. She had no child. So if you know anything about Genesis, barrenness drives the entire book. And the entire book, well, actually from chapter 12 on, is about the creation of the Israelite family. And let me stop here to say something about that. So, which I meant to say in the beginning, but I didn't. Genesis chapters 1 through 11 is about all of humanity. And it seems like God gives up on humanity. There are all kinds of problems. Adam and Eve eat the fruit of the forbidden, tree of knowledge, the Tower of Babel, the generation of Noah, there's a flood, Noah's sons are problematic. So there's all kinds of problems. And then God finally decides, I'm going to focus on one person and create a people from that one person. Right? So this is a different kind of genealogy. Okay, so here we have, we're approaching God's enterprise of creating an Israelite family, and we immediately hit barrenness. And what's interesting here is that the journey that this family will take occurs right after the verse. We're told about it right after the verse that tells us about barrenness. So in verse 31, Vayikach Terach et Avraham beno ve'et Lot ben Haran ben beno ve'et Sarai kalato eshet Avram beno ve'etzu itam me'ur kastim lalechet arza Canaan v'yavo ad Haran v'yishvu sham. So Terach took his son Avram, his grandson Lot, the son of Haran, his daughter-in-law Sarai, the wife of his son Avram, and they set out together from Ur the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. But when they had come as far as Haran, they settled there. So there's so much here. First of all, who goes on this journey? If you think about it, every person in this family is reckoning with loss. So Terach's idea to go on this journey, he's the one who takes his family. He takes Avram, who lost his brother and whose wife is barren. He takes Lot, who lost his father. And he takes his daughter-in-law Sarai, who's struggling with barrenness. And that's who goes on this journey. Now, Avram, the reputation of Avram is like, he's this great revolutionary. People hardly ever mention that the journey was his father's idea, right? His father took him on the journey, but they get stuck halfway there. They get stuck in Haran. Now, to me, it's so resonant that they get stuck in the place, Haran, that sounds just like the son, Haran, that Terach lost, right? So do they get stuck in the place of grief? Okay, and now here's something else. So at the end of chapter 11, we're told of Terach's death. Vayiyu yemei Terach 5 shanim u'matayim shana. He was 205. Vayamat Terach b'Haran. And Terach died in Haran. But remember, Terach was 70 when his son Avram was born. Now, Avram was 75 when he makes the journey. So Terach is very much alive when Avram leaves home. Okay, but we have this parsha break. This is the end of the last parsha and the end of the chapter. And then we go to chapter 12 and a new parsha where we get the call, right? And it looks almost like Avram is getting, well, it does look like Avram's getting the call in Ur, the place that Terach started the journey, as if it's Avram's journey. But it's not his journey alone. If you really think about it, Avram completes his father's dream because Terach gets stuck. Okay, so now let's just look at this for a minute. So this is really interesting. So this is a Fertile Crescent. And if there was an Avram, and Avram did really make the journey, then we can imagine that he made the journey in the following way. He went from Ur to Haran. So that whole path is sort of very close to the Euphrates. So it depends on a river, right? So there's water. But from Haran to Canaan, which is here, they are really far from the coast and there's no more rivers, right? So what they need to depend on here is rain. Now, later on, I think it's in Deuteronomy, God says something like, the land I'm giving you is not a land of rivers or water. I forget, maybe someone can remind me exactly what it says or put the verse in the chat. But Eretz Canaan is a land of rain. In other words, it's a land of trust. You need to sort of look to the heavens for my sustenance and for my nurturing. So Avram it's a whole different kind of journey to go from Haran, which again was probably a center of moon worship, to Canaan, right? So as they're traversing this land, the theme of barrenness, we could say, is not only about Avram's wife, Sarai, but also potentially, depending on the rains, right, also true about the land itself. Okay, so I said a lot. I talked for a while. So I'm going to do a few more verses and I'm going to open things up. So here we get that call, right? Here we get the call. Where the call comes, does it come in Haran? Does it come in Ur? Not really clear, but the call comes. Vayomer Adonai, and here's like the introduction of Yud He Vav He to this family. Vayomer Adonai El Avram, Lech Lecha Me'artzecha. Go for yourself. Go into yourself. Go forth. Not exactly sure how to translate that. Me'artzecha, from your land, umi moladitcha, from your birthplace, umi beit avicha, and from your father's house, el haaretz asher ereka, to the land where I will show you, as we were just discussing, or that I will show to you, right? Ve'escha legoy gadol, ve'avarecha ve'agadla shemecha v'hiyeh bracha, and I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. So there's so much here. One is, think about these things that God is promising Avram with. he'll be a great nation. Does that happen in his lifetime? No. He has 2 sons, right? Maybe he has some more later on with, when he marries after the Akedah, but he's not a great nation in his lifetime. And he will amplify his name. It's not clear how much his name is amplified in his lifetime. And then here's V'hiyeh bracha, which could almost be read as a command, and you shall be a blessing. You be a blessing, right? Love that. So it's, if you think about motivation and individuals, like I'm motivated when someone says, okay, you do this, you can have a cookie at the end. Or at least if I was a kid, I'd be motivated by that. And maybe sometimes even now I'm motivated by that. But it's like such a short-term reward. These are not short-term rewards. I don't even know, how much of them, how many of them, or in what way they occur during Abraham's lifetime. And if you think about the previous genealogy, to me at least, the recurrence of all these reishes and chets and the sense of the moon and, the cycles and the repetition of the moon have a sense to me of utter stuckness, right? So, and then they emerge, but then they get stuck in Haran, right? So Avram's asked to make a longer term journey and to leave that stuckness and leave that grief. At least that's my interpretation of things. I think we're going to stop here and we're going to see if there are comments. And I'm going to ask everybody, Nechemia, I'm going to assume that you want to go later, so I'm not going to call you. That's what you're saying? Okay, great. I'm going to see, does anyone want to speak at this point? Questions, adding information, things you want me to know because I missed them in the chat. Aha! Richard and Amy are a friend from Tallahassee. Oh, and Somi. Okay, ready. People have to unmute themselves. Yes.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
The journey to Haran, Nahor doesn't go.
Correct.
What's up?
It's a really good question. I mean, Nahor did lose a brother, but everyone else lost, either a reckoning with barrenness or a more immediate loss. That's one thought. And, there's always someone who doesn't go.
But the others went on the journey despite their loss. It's a mystery. What's with the core?
Well, think about families that leave. Often the whole family doesn't leave, right? Different things are going on. And it's interesting that Avram, or then Abraham, sends his servant back to Nahor's family in Haran, to get a wife for his son. Right? So we do go back and sort of retrieve part of that family. But it's a fascinating point. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
What does Nahor mean, the name?
Does it have a meaning?
It has the chet and the resh.
That's it?
That's it. That's all I have to say about it. Maybe someone else has more to say about it. But that's
all right. Well, thanks for opening a mystery. I appreciate it.
Okay, Amy.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Good to see you.
So good to see you. So you should ask yourself the question: what made Terah get up and go, and make him got up and went? So Nimrod was the king. Abraham and Terah was an advisor to Nimrod. Abraham was running around proselytizing, that was, thinking about this one God concept, which really rubbed Nimrod, the God king, the wrong way. So Nimrod threw Abraham into a furnace. Abraham survived. Haran said, oh, look, if my brother could do it, I could do it. But he didn't survive in the furnace. He died in the furnace. And it looked like it was time to get out of town.
It may be in Taurus.
Because Terah could see the writing on the wall that Nimrod wasn't going to give up and was going to try to kill him and Abe. So it was time to go.
Got it. Great, Amy. Thank you so much. And we have that Midrash on the page. So we're going to see if we can get to it. Thank you so much. So that's all rabbinic and wonderful rabbinic legend that explains so many of the mysteries of, these movements. Okay. So me.
I was just kind of surprised to hear you say stuckness. Because hearing all of the words that you were describing of the cycles of the moon and then these long distances that they're traversing with, like most likely they're either walking slowly one foot in front of the other because it's such a long distance, and then needing to set up camp and find food, and like these are all very slow, arduous journeys. Either that or they're on like a donkey or a camel, so it's like plod, 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 you know, and watching the cycles of the moon come in and out, watching the cycles of the seasons where the rains come or do not, the rivers rise or do not. So, I mean, the stuckness is, the word stuck kind of stuck in my head of something that's more like, like the sensation of just being stuck, like caught in this rhythm that is very slow, but constantly moving forward, and very much in the same way as like the spiral of the way that Judaism has time in it, right? Like the spiral of never in the same place, but it's always familiar. So I don't know. I just wanted to vocalize that.
Yeah, no, I love that sense of realia, right? The slow plot of moving forward. I said stuck because, you know, they aim for Canaan and they stay in Haran, right? So that's one reason. But I think what you're saying about Judaism and the spiral is really on point right now, because Judaism's the religion that adds the sun to the lunar calendar, right? We adjust with the sun so that the holidays remain seasonal because they're harvest holidays. That's one thing. And the other thing is that, yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question about stuckness. Like if you think about, you know, a youthful rebellion, like when I, you know, left home, you know, when I was, you know, went to college, I wasn't supposed to leave home. And I thought that I was rejecting everything that my parents gave me. But later on, from what I think was a wiser point of view, I realized they started a journey that they couldn't finish and I was continuing. So there's two ways to look at Avram's life. One is his father was an idol worshiper. He rejected all the values and he needed to leave home and individuate and and he had nothing to do with his parents or his family, home, and culture. And the other is like, my father started a journey he couldn't finish, and here I am, sort of on his shoulders, you know, living out or continuing that dream. So thank you.
What is Judaism if not that?
What?
What is Judaism if not that?
Right, right, exactly. Okay, so I see Myron and Alana. I hope I'm not missing anybody. Okay. Myron Schwartzman, great to see you. You have to unmute yourself, Myron. Okay, we're going to go to Alana while you figure this out. Oh, and then Daniel. Okay.
It's 12. I am so moved by this framing of the journey as beginning with Terach's grief.
It's a well-kept secret.
Yeah. Bring forward a kind of question or about what do we do with the grief of our ancestors, how it gets folded into who we are and how we're stuck and how we go forward. Because we could also tell this story as the grief propelling Terach on. You know, we're not told why he leaves, but we know that he's carrying this grief. So in a way, the grief might have caused him to leave, to go somewhere else with his grief. And then that grief is unfinished in his lifetime and gets passed on to Avram, just as the grief of our ancestors, our lives get passed on, get both transcended, stuck, and passed on, just in the way that we come back to this story. And here we are sitting with the grief of Terach, with and both the challenges for what that can give us, that can cause us to look at how we're stuck, or what is stuck in our grief, and what allows us to do something different with it.
Yeah, and that reminds me that when I was studying this morning with Sharon, she brought up the image of Lot's wife, who, gets turned, who looks back at Sodom and the destruction of her family and her town and her, home and everything that she had. And she turns into a pillar of salt. And Sharon was saying, you turn into a pillar of salt when you can't cry. Everything gets just frozen in place.
Yeah, there's some griefs that we can't transcend.
Yeah. Thank you, Alana. Okay, so Daniel, Margot, Jay, and then I'm going to go forward and look at some more texts.
Good Shabbos.
Shabbos.
So I was doing a little research on the name Terech, and there's a Hebrew word that has its root, tarchif, the same three-letter root in tarchif, which means suspension, that which is suspended. But there's something in Terech's name that is on this theme that you and Anna were just talking about, really beautiful. Suspended, what's suspended? There's this transitional generation that's happening. And then to be a little playful, I erased a little bit of that section of the chet, where it could easily be a hay rather than
alarm.
And then you have the word Torah in Terech's name. Do you see that little bit? If you erase just a little bit of the chet and make it a hay,
Nice.
Torah. And maybe that's the healing piece around the generational issue, that Abraham and those generations are going to become the ones that literally find the way, because that's what Torah means, the way.
Well, to combine that idea with Avram being called an Ivri, one who passes over, maybe our past becomes Torah when we figure out how to emerge.
How do we emerge from where we're suspended in Terach?
Yes, beautiful. Okay, I'm going to go on. Okay, I'm going to ask everyone to, thank you, Daniel, that was really beautiful. I'm going to ask everyone to be brief so we can go on and do some more texts. Okay, Myron, can you unmute now? Are you?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, it's so like Shabbat Shalom to everyone, and it's so nice to see you. I have a question. What is the estimate of what a year actually was that these people lived to 75?
Around 2000 BCE, but I really have
how long was a year?
I have no idea.
Right.
I read this literarily. I don't read it as a historical. It's a historical document, but not in terms of like this happened, this number is correct. It's a document of history.
Gotcha.
Sorry,
okay.
I can't be more helpful. Okay, I'm going to go on. Thank you, Myron. Good to see you. Don't forget to
see you.
Okay, Margot, and then Jay, and then I think we're moving forward. Yeah.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, Margot.
So I was also intrigued by Terach leaving, and yet it's Abraham's Lech Lecha, or Avram's Lech Lecha. And it seems to me that there had been two tragedies in Avram's life during the previous parsha. So the death of his brother and his barrenness. And then we add the third tragedy, which is the death of his father. So now he has to start again. And the Talmud
doesn't die until much later. He doesn't, he even though it says it there in the text, his father actually lives till 205. Avram was born when his father was 70, and Avram takes the journey when he's 75. So he's 145 now.
So why? But it's listed there.
Exactly.
And then he hears Lech Lecha.
Exactly.
Is it some sort of concept of mortality or something that sneaks in before the beginning of the Lech Lecha? In any case, it seems the three is significant because until Terach's death is mentioned, he doesn't hear the Lech Lecha, even though it hasn't happened. I guess I'll leave it there with the mystery.
No, I have an idea about that. So I was talking to a friend this week, a different friend, not Sharon, about what does it really mean to individuate? It means so much more than leaving your home physically, right? You carry your family's voices and some kind of inner script with you. And at least in my experience, I feel like it takes decades to even notice that enmeshment, right? You leave home physically, you establish your own family, or you do whatever you're doing, you establish whatever you're establishing apart from your family, but that inner script. So perhaps Terach had to die in some way for Abraham, but not physically, for Abraham to get the call. I'm just sort of, interpreting in response to your question, but I'm going to move on. Thank you, Margot. Jay.
Shabbat Shalom. I am fascinated, as Ilana was to some extent, about this notion of stopping at Haran and being stuckness. And if Margot will permit me, I would say maybe the third trauma was the fact that they did not finish the journey and got stuck in Haran. And this and Ilana's notion of this cross-generational transmission of unfinished trauma and grief is exactly that, because it's clear from the text that they were going lalechet arza, which is weird when you think about it. I mean, fast forward 2,000 years, it's almost like aliyah, it's like hasbara of the Jewish agency or something. So maybe we need to pay more attention to that notion of they did not finish the journey. They got, as you say, stuck. They did not complete perhaps the total process of dealing with their grief and the loss. And that's why Avram was called to finish the journey.
Beautiful, beautiful. And sometimes the trauma is just related to what you're saying, is just like the culture of your family and wanting it to be more and getting the call that kind of allows you to go to the next level, I guess. Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, here we go. Okay, so we already did a lot. Okay, this is the Midrash that Amy was talking about. And it's a really interesting sort of portrayal of family dynamics. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm going to skip around a little bit. So Terach was a worshiper. So they're interpreting the whole thing about Haran dying in the presence of his father, right? That tragic, tragic moment. So here's how they explain it. Here's how the rabbis explain it. And this is in Breshit Rabbah, which is the Midrash, rabbinical legend on the book of Genesis. So Terach, the rabbis tell us, was a worshiper of idols. One time he had to travel to a place and he left Abraham in charge of his idol worship store, his idol store, right? When a man would come in to buy idols, Abraham would ask, "How old are you?" They would reply, 50 or 60. Abraham would then respond, "Woe to him who's 60 years old and worships something made today." The customer would be embarrassed and would leave. So here Abraham is kind of the truth teller, right? The unabashed truth teller, certainly not taking care of people's feelings around him. Okay, a woman entered carrying a dish full of flour. She said to him, "This is for you. Offer it before them." Abraham took a club in his hands and broke all of the idols and placed the club in the hands of the biggest idol. When his father returned, he asked, "Who did all of this?" Abraham replied, "I can't hide it from you. A woman came carrying a dish of flour and told me to offer it before them. I did, and one of them said, 'I will eat it first.' Another said, 'I will eat it first.' The biggest one rose, took a club, and smashed the rest of them." So sibling rivalry amongst the idols, right? Terach said, "What, do you think you can trick me? They don't have cognition." Abraham said, "Do your ears hear what your mouth is saying?" So again, Abraham is playing a kind of prophetic role here. Terach took Abraham. So the conversation with his father is over. Terach took Abraham and passed him off to King Nimrod. That's the evil king in charge at the time. They said to the king, "Let us worship to the fire." Abraham said to them, "Rather, let us worship water, for it extinguishes fire." Nimrod agreed, "Let us worship water." Abraham continued, "If so, let us worship the clouds, which provide water." Nimrod agreed, "Let us worship the clouds." Abraham continued, "If so, let us worship the winds that scatter the clouds." Nimrod agreed, "Let us worship the winds." So you see again how Abraham in this long midrash is playing games with everyone around him to get them to see what for him is the truth. Abraham continued, if so, let us worship humans who are filled with wind. Sorry, there's an ambulance going by. Nimrod replied, you're just speaking words. I only worship fire. So Nimrod's basically a worship fire kind of guy. I will throw you into it, and the God you worship can save you from it. Haran was hidden. So Avram's brother was hidden and was of two minds, saying to himself, if Avram is victorious, I will say I'm with Abraham. If Nimrod is victorious, I will say I am with Nimrod. When Abraham, this is a little confusing, sorry, was thrown into the fiery furnace and saved, they asked him, Haran, who are you with? He replied, I am with Abraham. So he's being pragmatic here. They took him and threw him into the fire, and his insides burned up, and he died before his father Terach, as it says. And Haran died on the face, or before the presence of his father Terach. So Haran, Avram's brother, saw what Avram did and thought it was just a matter of allegiance. Didn't understand that you had to have like the inwardness to survive the fire of the king, right? And to come through unscathed. Okay, so I'm going to do one more midrash with you, because I think this midrash is really very, very sort of the moment. It feels really resonant at this point. So the rabbis are trying to understand, what is this call to Avram and where did it come from? Like, what generated it? And they answer this way. Rabbi Yitzchak said, this may be compared to a man who was traveling from place to place when he saw a castle aglow. So a birah doleket. And just know, a birah doleket can mean a palace or a castle that's aglow or luminous, or it could mean a castle that's on fire. So Avram said, is it possible that this castle lacks a person to look after it? So if it's on fire, like, why is no one doing anything about it? And the owner of the building looked at him and said to him, I am the master of the castle. So they're comparing the master of the castle, obviously, to God, and God is basically calling Abraham and announcing himself, or God's self, to Abraham. What happened with Avram, our father, was similar. He said, is it possible that this universe lacks a person to look after it? The Holy One, blessed be he or she, looked at him and said, I am the master of the universe. We're going to skip that because complicated proof texts. So I think actually we got the gist of it. So it's all about Avram asking the question of, look what's happening in this universe, who's in charge? And the call as a way of God saying, here I am, right? It's almost like God's Hineni before we hear Avram's Hineni. Okay, so I'm going to stop my share. And, okay, Asher Chaim.
Yeah, I'm still down the rabbit hole of the last discussion, which I find fascinating. And I realize the prejudice of lech lecha me'artzecha, from your land, moladatecha, place of birth, usually, mibeit avicha, from your father's house, suggests that Avram was being called in Ur. But the key word there, the most difficult, is moledet. I was checking my favorite book, the Concordance, and found that wonderful word, moledet, that when Abraham asks his servant to go back and find a wife for Yitzchak, he says, moladati, the place of my moledet, referring to Haran.
Yeah.
So the call is clearly coming in Haran, which Abraham considers his land, his moledet, and certainly it's his father's house, because his father is still alive. Okay, so the rabbit hole question that I throw out. 30 years ago, I was living in Oklahoma, and usually people ask, so, where do you come from? And I can answer, I was born in New Haven, blah, 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 blah. But this fellow said, so where's home? And it just threw me in a way that led to at least a long essay or two, because what is the place we consider our home, our moledet, our Beit Av, and how do we leave home? And maybe God is always calling us to leave our place of comfort and to go somewhere else. And I'll just stop the rant here. Thank you for raising all of this again, Dibarti.
I will say to you, I'll answer on two levels. I was born in South America, grew up in Brooklyn. For sure, Brooklyn's my home. I mean, or for sure, Brooklyn is the place where, I grew up and I needed to leave. For sure. That's number one. And number two, I feel like there's something about the dislocation of the call that's really compelling. Like, to me, we get that, like, where'd that call come? So maybe it came in Ur and in Haran and all along the way. Maybe in all our stuckness every day, we're hearing that call. And we either hear it or we don't hear it. But even if we don't hear it, at least in my case, it bothers me. Right?
If I may add.
Yeah.
Avram has itchy feet.
Yeah.
Because when he got to Haran, he thought, okay, this is home. And then God told him, no, it's not home. And he goes into Canaan, but God never tells him where to stop. So he keeps going from place to place to place and into Egypt and back. And he's not a settler. He's a mover.
Well, that's also interesting because Terach had a destination in mind. Terach was going to Canaan, right? It says Canaan. But God says to Abraham, go to the place that I will show you. So it's moving into a whole different consciousness, right? It's moving into lack of certainty. I don't quite know where I'm going, but I'm willing to leave the past behind. Okay, I'm going to go on, Asher Chaim. I have to go on.
Not even one more little one?
Little. Go ahead, little.
God tells Abraham, if you want me to give you this land, you have to walk it all over the place. You can't be stuck in one place.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the practice, really, of moving forward. It's not just one journey, right? It's moving into, I think, a whole different kind of consciousness and movement in your life. Okay, so, oh my God, I see the person from, Nechemia, I'm going to get you right after this person. Yes, Sir Linas, I forgot your first name. I know you're from...
Hélio, São Paulo.
Elias?
Hélio. Yes, please.
Okay. And where are you from
Shabbat
again?
shalom.
Oh, São Paulo.
São Paulo.
Wonderful.
Shabbat shalom.
Good to have you again.
I don't know why many people say that Lech Lecha, go out or go in. But in the parasha, all the time, God say to go out. In any place, God, I don't know in what place God say to go in. All the time, God say to go out. Why Hashi? Many people say to go in. This parasha, God say to go out, not to go in.
But it's Lech Lecha. But wait, it's Lech Lecha. Go for yourself. Or when you go, what's that Lecha doing there? That's the question.
Yes.
So it's kind of a paradoxical movement. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's only when I leave that I figure out who I am.
Yes, but the problem is if you go inward, you go to the same. I think the parasha is saying to go to out, to different.
Yes, I agree. Go to different. I totally agree. And in fact, I think that there's limited places we can get to if we depend on our own cognition. Like we have to put ourselves in new places and then maybe we'll have new cognition. But you can't just kind of, so to speak, daven in your own mind again and again and get to a new place. Right? You just end up going around in circles and you're stuck there in Haran or in Ur or whatever. But thank you. I think that's a really important point. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a couple of other texts. Harley, I'm not going to call on people twice. I'm sorry. You spoke already, didn't you, Harley? Okay. Put it in the chat. Nechemia, and then I want to do a couple of texts with you. You have to unmute.
Shabbat Shalom, Kehila Kedusha.
Shabbat Shalom.
I believe that we are all called one time or another with Lech Lecha. And for me, this parasha is the most meaningful parasha in the entire Torah. Because when I was called to go to a center of yoga and I had a rabbi, I couldn't ask him because I knew what would be the answer. I couldn't ask anybody who didn't have spiritual experience. So I had to ask God from inside. And God came in a powerful experience. And after 3 days of wondering if I should go, and 3 hours of sleep, I got up in the morning and I was totally with Abraham. I'm leaving, I don't know where I'm going, but I'm so happy I went. And I went there and I went back to Judaism, I went back. And this, daring to go with the inner voice of God, which we all have, even if it doesn't agree with the concept that we were taught, including even living Judaism for a while, wherever we need to go. And the last thing is a funny one about Nahor.
Okay.
Nahor is connected to the word Nocher. Maybe he was too asleep.
Nice, beautiful. Thank you so much. I want to say what Samati, beautiful. So I want to say one comment, but not in conversation, is that for me, there's no clear God voice inside by which I can make decisions. Like, I don't know how to do that. For me, it's like more discernment in like a thicket of complexity to figure out where I'm going next. So we each have different experience. I'm not a conversation. I'm going to share my screen. Thank you, Nechemi. I just wanted to present a different way of moving forward, just in case there are others here, and there probably aren't, who feel lost in the thicket of complexity. Okay, sharing my screen. Okay, so this actually speaks to Eliu's point. Religion, the end of isolation, begins with a consciousness that something is asked of us. Wonder is not a state of aesthetic enjoyment. Endless wonder unlocks an innate sense of indebtedness. Okay, there's a lot there in this Heschel quote, and there's a lot to unpack here. But I like the idea that, and Levinas says something like this too, that in this moment of Lech Lecha, Avram is called out of his own solipsism, like his own sort of, stuck mind, and, the small place of the mind. Okay, here is this is again Sharon's voice. And she says, and this also speaks to the inside and the outside. From the beginning, the Jewish journey has been one of engagement, of responsibility for rather than retreat from the world. And this is all about the palace is burning, right? And right now, like, our world really is burning up on so many levels, right? And who is in charge? To love God is to love God's world. The imagery of the Midrash sharpens the message. The world is God's palace, and the palace is on fire. Such awareness is difficult to sustain, we well know. But the words Lech Lecha vibrate with divine urgency. Go forth, the world needs you. Yet in the same breath, God beckons, Lech Lecha, go inward. With a subtle shift and inflection, the same words convey another layer of meaning. Start with yourself, the places where your own heart is aching, the chambers of your inner palace that are in need of repair. Go inward and go outward. And this goes back to what Alana was saying about the ancestral grief, right? Like the chambers of your inner palace that are in need of repair, where your own heart is aching. My fear about this is actually addressed by the beginning of this. Like if we get stuck in like the places of our pain, then we never tend to the world that's on fire. Alana, what do you want to say?
I'm really glad you came back to this quote as kind of coming, because when sometimes I struggle in the abstract of the idea of going inward to go outward, and how sometimes that going inward can prevent you from going outward, or sort of the navel gazing, and how to kind of balance both of those. And what came up for me a lot this week was like, if you're trying to build something different and you're using the same constructs that you're trying to take apart, you're not going to get to a different place.
Yes.
And so it actually, so like that, the need to kind of do that repair and figure out what it is so that you're not following that same grooved path, but actually taking a new path.
Wait, so it's essential to end up moving into a different paradigm.
Potentially, yeah. I think so. And that inner work is actually super important at the same time that you are journeying, or that they kind of like build on each other. That, as you were saying, the new experience gives you a different perspective. But if you don't do the healing, or if you don't do that inward looking, you may end up being in that new place in the same way that you were in the old place.
Yes, I think you said it beautifully. Exactly. It's amazing how many new places you can go to that feel like the old place if there hasn't been that inner shift. Okay. I'm going to stop my share for a second and see if there's anyone else that wants to say anything. Harley, since no one else has anything to say, do you want to say what you had to say?
Well, I wrote it in the chat, and it's just that I think it's a follow-up that the God had made, the divine had made certain promises that I'll bless you, I'll make you, I'll show you.